On the surface, the modern world looks like a paradise for thinkers. Boundless storage, infinite scrolls of information, real-time collaboration across borders, tools that transcribe and summarize and simulate, and of course, the ever-present iPhone. With every passing week, every passing day, our tools evolve to do more of our cognitive labor for us. Writing is spell-checked and grammar is auto-corrected, and research is semi-automated, and increasingly, ideas are co-written with artificial intelligence. We command and use more computational power every minute than all of NASA's engineers combined during the Apollo missions. But if you ask any of us how we feel about our thinking, the depth of it, the originality, the clarity, you won't hear breathless enthusiasm. You'll hear about frustration, anxiety, and a low-level but persistent sense of mental clutter. There's a contradiction here, and it's not a new one. The belief that more capacity leads directly to better thought is old, attractive, and entirely wrong. In Borges' fable, we are introduced to a library containing every possible combination of letters, punctuation, and spaces. Somewhere in its indefinite shelves lies every truth ever uttered or written, and every falsehood. The librarians, faced with total knowledge, descend into madness and superstition. Information without constraint becomes noise. What happens when the tools meant to upgrade our thinking start to impair it? A crucial lesson from the history of art and science is that constraints often enable creativity rather than stifle it. The poetic forms of the sonnet and the haiku seem unnecessarily strict by modern standards, but their boundaries have produced some of the most profound literary works. Igor Stravinsky once wrote that the more constraints one imposes, the more one frees one's self. It's easy to dismiss this as a romantic conceit, but it reflects a real dynamic in cognition. Constraint focuses attention. It reduces the agony of choice, and it turns creativity into a navigable problem space instead of an open-ended void. In digital environments, constraints tend to be seen as bugs, not features. Twitter was mocked early on for its 140-character limit, but that very restriction created a new form of punchy, epigrammatic discourse. Blogging platforms that forced short-form updates or stripped away formatting often led to more honest, less performative content. The paradox of modern productivity tools is that their richness overwhelms. Think of the infinite tabs you open while trying to write a single paragraph. The document you're working in is likely connected to a cloud, accessible on multiple devices, with plugins for collaboration, inline editing, and formatting. You can embed video, cite sources live, and even co-write with a chatbot, but you feel more distracted, more mentally fogged, than if you were scrolling notes with a pen on paper. The frictionless environment removes all walls. But without walls, you can't build a room. The very idea of a workspace implies enclosure. Without it, we are perpetually open to invasion by notifications, by ambient anxiety, by the sense that we could be doing something else, somewhere else, slightly better. The analog world imposed hard constraints. A library eventually had to close. A typewriter ran out of ink. You couldn't ask it to summarize your notes for you. And these limitations forced a kind of attention, even reverence for the materials of thought. Digital environments flatten all of that. Every document is retrievable, every search is global, every text is editable. But with this flattening comes a kind of cognitive disorientation, a lost sense of when something is completed or even when it's real at all. The idea that you've finished a draft or a book or even a thought presupposes an environment where edits carry cost. When you wrote a manuscript by hand, you knew when you were done because fixing anything meant rewriting it. The permanence gave shape to your effort. The same is true for thought. A constrained environment produces events. A limitless one produces process. This might explain why so much digital writing feels like it's always in beta. The permanence of blog posts and forum entries is undercut by the ease of revision. The result is a genre of text that is always provisional, always half-formed. But without milestones, there is no arrival. And without arrival, one never really departs. Every thought is just an airport layover. You can see this conflict between opulence and constraint in the deep tension between two archetypes of intellectual labor, the tech startup and the monastery. The former is maximalist, adaptive, relentlessly networked. It thrives on frictionless communication and rapid iteration. The latter is minimalist, ritualized, and deliberately cut off from the world. Medieval monasteries, far from being backwards, were engines of literacy, innovation, and scientific record-keeping. Their rules imposed rigid schedules and limited possessions and hours of daily silence. But within these constraints, monks copied manuscripts and tracked the stars and pioneered agricultural techniques. Their cognitive environment was highly bounded but intellectually fertile. Silicon Valley, for all its power, creates environments that inhibit deep thinking. Open-plan offices, Slack channels, and perpetual beta products encourage surface engagement. Over the last decade, a subset of technologists have fled this dynamic through digital monasticism, silent writing retreats, offline days, even the use of nostalgic tools like the FreeWrite or the AlphaSmart. These aren't nostalgic affectations. They're attempts to recover cognitive ground ceded to frictionless digital systems. A core assumption of the digital era is that thought can be optimized like code, that intelligence is downstream of information, and that more inputs will yield better outputs. But the mind is not a compiler. Thought is not just what happens when data is fed through an algorithm. In his book The Intellectual Life, the 20th century Catholic philosopher A.G. Sertelange outlines a model of thinking that has almost nothing in common with modern productivity culture. He emphasizes silence, solitude, reflection, and above all, time. The time to let a question ripen, the time to reread and rewrite and rethink. And in digital terms, this is latency. But latency is now seen as a failure of infrastructure, not a necessary substrate of thought. The pressure to eliminate delay, to collapse the gap between idea and execution, is actively hostile to rumination, and rumination is where originality lives. It's not an inefficiency, it is the cost of depth. Unlimited possibility is an invitation to paralysis. Kierkegaard understood this when he wrote about the dizziness of freedom experienced by a man standing on a cliff. The sheer number of options, to jump, to step back, to sit, to yell, becomes overwhelming. Confronted with 50 browser tabs and 100 open threads and a dozen different platforms that all look the same, we might feel something similar. The freedom to choose is the religion of our time. Keep your options open, stay agile, avoid commitment. But thinking needs commitment and the exclusion of alternatives. Constraints, by cutting away options, reduce the cost of decision. They make deliberation possible and they create affordances for action. Without them, we're rich in potential, poor in motion, and paupers in output. There is no going back to the analog world, but the idea that progress has to mean the elimination of every constraint is not borne out by either history or experience. The best thinking of the next century won't come from maximal exposure to information or tools, but it will come from limitations. Some of these can be self-imposed. Write with the Wi-Fi off, set a page limit, use simpler tools. Others can be architectural. Adopt practices that deliberately reduce choice, enforce breaks, limit editing, reintroduce friction. One of the most startling things about visiting a historic library or monastery is the quiet. Not only the absence of noise, but the presence of attention. A kind of thick stillness. Digital tools don't make that impossible, but they do make it rare. Thinking has always asked us for something more than access. It has craved retreat, a structure, a wall, some quiet, and perhaps, most of all, a willingness to let the mind resist the ease of its own undoing.